Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. I am so pleased to be here with Dr. Dee Gray, who I'll introduce shortly. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Lucy Brown. I am new in post. I'm the Deputy Director of the Academy and absolutely pleased as punch to have joined the foundation. I was a scholar about 5 years ago, so I'm part of the alumni network as well. My background is obviously a nurse. I'm an intensive care nurse. And most recently been a director of nursing in numerous organisations, both in the independent sector and the NHS as well. I just wanted to give a bit of an introduction on Dee and her incredible career to date. So Dee was a fellow nurse and used to been within the career until 2006. Within that role, you're actually a crisis coordinator for the Hillsborough disaster in 1989, so saw firsthand the trauma that caused. Then left the nursing profession and studied law, focusing on medical negligence, and then went into a number of academic roles as a lecturer and a research fellow as well, and also led on major public sector reforms in the healthcare, which is really great. Dee also is director of her own wellbeing company, Gray's Wellbeing, which really focuses on people becoming their best selves. She's also a global collaborator and a counsellor and fellow for the Royal Society. And part of Dee's kind of ethos is to really encourage positive social change. So we're really fortunate to have Dee with us today. So without further ado, I'll hand across to you, Dee, to hear about Healing the Healers. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was a wonderful introduction. It's really, really a privilege to be here. But let's move into the workshop. So can we have the first slide, please? Thank you very much, Adam. So as Lucy has just explained, so I'm Dr. Dee Gray, and I thought that this webinar might be particularly useful to us at this time because so many people are on the front line of care, and when you're on the front line, it can be really difficult to raise your head from what is going on and get some help. And it's not misnamed when I talk about the front line. Ordinarily, the front line is something that we think of in terms of war zones and the theatre of war. And usually that refers to a space where the action is at its most intense, where there is a high risk of casualty, and it's a very stressful and traumatic environment. And so thinking about working currently in the NHS in terms of the front line, I think is quite appropriate. So that's really the flavour of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Can I have the next slide, please? So when we're in these situations of what become quite chaotic, it can be very, very difficult to establish boundaries. And the reason for that is we become overwhelmed by the circumstances that we find our practice being utilised. And establishing boundaries can be really, really difficult. The good news is, though, that even though everything around us might be not making an awful lot of sense for some of the time, those boundaries are still there and they're still in place. And I'm not talking about the sort of like the systems in organizations and the policies and all of those things that might give us some sort of reassurance and security about what we're doing. I'm talking about particular boundaries of well-being that we inherently all hold and have. Can I have the next bit, please? So the reason why I thought this might be really important right now is because in the last 18 months, the pace of change has just been unparalleled. We know, and it's quite common for us to say, well, change is the only constant in professional practice. But the pace of what's been happening has been really quite incredulous. And when we are in that environment, one way in which we can reestablish a boundary of well-being is to have a sense of coherence about what is going on. And I'll try and explain what I mean about a sense of coherence as we move forward a little bit. But for now, having a sense of coherence is about being able to anchor yourself and be aware of the bigger picture of your life, and that the events that are playing out currently are only part of a broader narrative that you belong to. This experience that you're currently having in terms of stress and stresses related to COVID are temporary. It can be hard to remember that when we really feel as if we're up against it. But we do need to try to establish one boundary, which is having the sense of coherence. Can we have the next bit, please? The other thing that's really, really, really important is about our energy, our fuel. And I'm sure many of you will be aware and familiar with what happens to us when we become stressed, in terms of where our energy is directed to and how it gets absolutely consumed in bucket loads by the psychological and biological changes that go on within our bodies. So we're not going to explore that today, but we know that our energy is seriously taken up when our sympathetic nervous system is triggered over and over and again. And that is often triggered when we're in very, very stressful situations. So if we're wondering where our energy went, by the end of the day, then we can easily find somewhere to an answer for that, in that we have been experiencing a very stressful situation, and that in itself just takes away all of your energy. When you know that, then what you can do, if you develop the skill set, is redirect your energy away from the triggers that are causing a fear response, and bring them back to what we call the best self. And that can be done. It's something that you need to develop, but it's something that can be done and is done by many of us every day of our working lives. Can we have the next bit, please? So one of the first things that we need to do is we need to know when the fuel in the tank is low. And this seems really very much like common sense, doesn't it? You know, but we're in danger when we're in these situations for the environment that we find ourselves to become normalized. And the fact that our energy is low is something that we become used to and think that we can push through that, we can still deliver to the same high standard. And for a while, that I would say that is probably true. But when your fuel becomes chronically low, then you are lining yourself up for some difficulties later on in terms of your own physical and mental well-being. Can we move on, please? Okay, so when you find yourself in those spaces where the fuel is low, one of the biggest questions we need to come back to, because of the nature of the role of nursing, and it's more or less a given that when you work as a nurse, you're in a profession where the energy from your being is outward focused, because you are caring for others. So it can be something that we lose sight of in terms of our own well-being, when we need to refocus back to ourself. And that the self is something that maybe we only become aware of at different times in our lives, when there's been a real dramatic change or breakthrough or an inspiring event, or when we've achieved something and we become aware of ourself. And in terms of well-being, the key to staying well in really, really traumatic environments is to know when you're in what we call the peripheral spaces of well-being, and we are motivated and proactive in looking after ourselves. Can we have the next bit, please? Okay, so, and the next bit, please, Adam. That's great. And the next bit, let's have the lot over there. That'll be great. Thank you very much. Okay, so in terms of what's going on with the pandemic, I can't, I wish I could, but I don't have the kind of magic wand that can resolve some of the challenges that everybody is facing. It would be wonderful to be able to say, yes, so we need more staff. We need staff that aren't tired and burnt out. We need more resources to work with. We need the IT equipment to work. We need the documentation to be timely. We need communication to be effective. All of those things that can impact and stress everybody out, with or without a pandemic. I don't influence. I can't influence, and I don't know whether you can influence. They are part and parcel of what is going on now. They are compounded by COVID, and in some ways, a lot of the things that may have held us back in our practice have been completely wiped away, and we're able to make decisions and move more quickly and see things develop in a way that we haven't seen before, and those things are really valuable. But the other side of it, where we are working longer hours, and we are being involved in experiences that we have been totally unprepared for, seriously impact our well-being. The pandemic itself has been likened to a war zone, and the thing is with war zones is they do have these boundaries where activities play out. So how do we come back to ourselves and make sure that the boundaries are established and re-established every day by ourselves? One of the ways that we do that, or we just do this naturally, we naturally do this. When we experience stress, one of the things we do is we absorb it. We have a natural capability to absorb stress. And the common parlance for that is you kind of suck it up. You suck up what's happening around you. You hope that it's temporary. You are so in the flow of what you're doing in work that you absorb a lot of stress. And for some of the time, you can cope with that. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions can cope with that. The next way we cope with stress is that we adapt. So we can adapt to the environment. As humans, we've had to learn how to do this. It's been adapt to survive a lot of the time. But in terms of the workplace, we adapt to having to work PPE, having to work different shifts, having to work in a different place that we've been practicing in for maybe the last number of years, and we have been able to adapt. The next stage of dealing with stress is when we anticipate. And we get to this anticipative stage after we have experienced enough stress to be able to figure out what's about to happen next. And this anticipation is a big part of having a sense of coherence. It's part of seeing the bigger picture because you have had sufficient experiences to be able to be aware that something is likely to happen next. And so you prepare for it. The final stage in which we manage stress and deal with stress is when it becomes transformational. And that can and does happen with us. But it often happens at a point where we are supported in making sense of all the stuff that has happened and our role and our part to play in it. And we can garner some wisdom and some purpose from that experience. And then it becomes transformational. So these are 4 ways in which we are currently dealing with our experiences of being on the front line with COVID. Can we have the next bit, please? And the next bit. Great. Okay, thank you. So in my work with people, I work with a lot of people who are in very, very high stress environments, and they have come to a point where it's really hard to see the wood for the trees, and those boundaries of well-being are just lost to them. And I work with them, and I teach this really, really simple model, very simple, and it's easy to remember. And I would like you to have a go at this afternoon. We'll just spend a few minutes of you exploring what this could do for you when you go away and you're back in clinical practice. So we're going to get you to draw 2 boundaries, and we do this through 2 circles. These circles are really important because they help you to recognize slides from the best self space into the peripheral spaces. Can we have the next bit, please? And when you do that, when you go through that process of knowing who you are, what your self is in these spaces, in the best self space and in the peripheral spaces, then you can gain some traction on what on earth is going on for you right now in the workplace, and you can steer your way back to being your best self. Can we have the next bit, please? So this was a group of people I worked with a couple of years ago, and this was a multi-professional team and a multidisciplinary team that also included experts through experience. And we were looking at creating boundaries for the team so that when there was a potential to slide into the peripheral spaces, everybody could recognize the signs within themselves and within the other team members. And you can see it's very easy to understand this little graphic, in that the best self space for this particular team involved being trusted and being able to trust. It was about respect, and it was about openness and having confidence. And these descriptions in the best self space, I've found over many years that they are similar, because as humans, we want and need a lot of similar things. Not the same, but similar things. So each team will have its own sort of like fingerprints, which makes this quite powerful, this 2-circle approach, because it brings well-being into something that is subjective and meaningful for you. I'm not going to tell you what your best self space is like or your peripheral spaces are like, because I don't know what they are. It's a very subjective process, and these need to be figured out by yourself. But the peripheral spaces for these people, and I'm sure you'll probably recognize at least one of them, is to do with blame and being in a blame culture. Can we have the next bit, please? And the next bit. Okay, so what we're going to do now, if you have it to hand, this would be really, really helpful. If you've got a pen or pencil and scrap of paper, that would be good. If you need a moment to rush up and get it, then please do so. And what we're going to do is we're going to work out our best self quite quickly. So can we have the next bit, please, Adam? And the next little bit. Okay, so the best self is a green circle, and it has been purposefully designed as a green circle because we associate green with energy, with renewal, with health, with well-being. And so our best self descriptions always go into the green circle. And what I'd like to invite you to do now, just for a couple of minutes, is think about some descriptions in terms of what your thoughts are like when you're in that space, what your emotions are like, how you're behaving when you're in that space, and really crucially, what your body feels like when you're in that space. And it can be your best self in terms of anything. It doesn't have to be work. It can be your life generally. Just take a moment just to reflect and remember who you are, who your self is when you are your best self. And I'm actually going to do it too, even though I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm going to do it for myself today, because then I'm going to figure out what number I am. So if we can just have a few moments on the clock, and then we'll continue on to the next bit. Okay, so let's start with thoughts. What are my thoughts? What are my emotions? What are my behaviors? And how does my body feel? Okay, so hopefully you've had just a few moments there just to scribble down a few things. Can we have the next bit, please, Adam? And again. That's it, perfect. Thank you. So you'll notice that this circle is a beautiful ultraviolet color. And this is the peripheral, the ultimate peripheral space in terms of your well-being. There are 7 spaces in total. 1 is your best self, and 7 at the polar end is number 7. Midway, we have 4. And 4 is the space that we've learned after conducting a little bit of research around this, is where eustress, which is good stress that helps focus your mind and keep your brain clear and help to mobilize you, perhaps in those early stages when you have to absorb stress and suck it up, tips into distress. So 5, 6, and 7 are where good stress turns to distress. And in those spaces, we see a progressive way of presenting ourselves in terms of whether we are healthy, whether we are well, whether we have energy, how we are behaving, how our body feels. Everything shifts in each space. So my space at 5 or 6 might be similar, but as I said earlier, it's going to be different from yours. And part of being able to establish this boundary is really knowing when you're sliding into these spaces. If we could just spend a few moments now thinking about, how are you when you're in the 7 space? Where do your thoughts go? What are your emotions like? Can you recall what your behaviors are like when you're in that 7 space? And again, how does your body feel to you? What messages is your body telling you when you're in the 7 space? And I'm going to do this with you. So let's see. So we've got our best self, and now we're going to do the peripheral space. So my thoughts, my emotions, my behaviors, how does my body feel when I'm in a 7? Okay, so if you've been able to just recall some of that, one of the things that might spring out to you is the experience of going from one to the other space. Is quite profound. And if we think about there are 7 spaces, I'd like you just to ask yourself, what number are you today? What is your well-being number today? And try and think about your team of people that you're working with. What number do you think your team members are right now? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a think about Salutogenesis, which is just the most wonderful word. And if you haven't come across it, it basically means the origins of health. And the work I do in terms of well-being is I take the best self well-being theories and the model, and I bring them together and marry them up with the wonderful well-being theories of salutogenesis. So it's an asset-based approach to health, and there are 4 components. The 3 main ones sit under the umbrella of a sense of coherence. And to have a sense of coherence, you need to have that worldview about what is going on right now. So you have comprehension. The second part of the salutogenic model is that you are able to manage your experiences relating to what is going on right now. And a big part of that is being resourceful. And an even bigger part of that is being able to go, can I have some help here, please? And being able to voice that. So if you have comprehension and you have management, then the final part of this is called meaning. And it's arguably the most important part of salutogenesis, because what you're doing right now on the front line has got to matter to you. It's got to mean something to you. If it's lost its meaning to you, then it really doesn't matter. It isn't any use me talking about well-being to you, because well-being, your well-being has got to mean something and matter to you. Your sense of self has really, really got to matter to you. And when we go into that side of the model, then we're thinking about developing wisdom from your experience. And then we're leaping in beautifully into that transformational part of making sense of trauma and stress and dealing with stress. But we're into that transformational way of being. So the 4th part of salutogenesis are this, I love it, a thing called generalized resistance resources, which are wonderfully abbreviated into GRRS, which is great and makes me smile every time I say it. And what these are all the buffers, all of the things, all of the boundaries. So we're back to talking about boundaries again, all of the boundaries that you can create that help you remain well in these very, very stressful times. One of the things that are key to having help is being able to talk. So what I'd like to invite you to do now is I'd like you to talk about what is draining you. I'd like you to use the power of your voice and feel safe, psychologically safe, that right now you could just share with us in this webinar what is draining you right now, what is draining your well-being. So if you've got your microphones off, please flip them back on. You don't have to put your cameras on if you don't feel like doing that. But it's nice to see your faces though. And just share with us what's draining your well-being right now.
I'm happy to interject, Dee, and then perhaps I hand across to someone else. I think someone else might have wanted to share. I think for me, what drains me is so I'm a busy working mum, and it's juggling kind of all the activities, what the children are doing, what focused on work, and just I don't always have time for myself because I'm always thinking of others, either through my work as a nurse, my team, but then also my children as well and my other responsibilities. So that's what generally drains me, keeping those things going, keeping on track. Okay, so it's the day-to-day, everyday day-to-day routine of caring for everybody else and not finding any time to put yourself first. Not always. I do find time and make time, but it's making that conscious effort to do that every day and make sure that I eat properly and sleep and all of those things you need to do. But it's always, I'm not always at the forefront like I should be. Because if I don't look after myself, I can't look after others. And you find yourself slipping into you put yourself at the bottom of the list rather than the top. Yeah, well, we know that in our heads. Yeah.
And we're very good at saying this to other people, but in practice, it's like anything else. You need to plan for your well-being. You need to be quite disciplined in that you have an activity, something every day, and you need to plan it in, because it won't happen of its own accord. So it's something that a way of a routinized practice that you really, really do need to develop. And if you can do this at an individual level and a team level, then what happens then in a department or an organization is you get this strategic spread of well-being, because everybody has thought about it every day and practiced it every day. Is this the same for other people this afternoon on the call who find themselves at the back of the queue in terms of looking after yourself and what's draining your well-being?
I think Sheba's taking her microphone off, so she might want to.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
Yeah, I just wanted to say related to work. It's not having those boundaries that we had before. We're not seeing the end. We're thinking, oh, we've ridden one wave of COVID, for example, and then before you know it, before even you could come back a little bit, feel a bit better, the team, you're trying to build it, and then another thing happens. So it's like constantly you're riding these waves, going back and forth rather than seeing the end.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Sheba. I really don't mean at all to be quite sort of glib about this when I describe this as an endurance ride, because that is absolutely what this has become. It is it's a situation where perhaps initially we all thought, well, this might be the next few months, we'll get over the first winter crisis, and then we can start to resolve some things and develop new practice and pick up on some of the things that are really important to us. But that does not seem to be happening yet. And I do want to emphasize the yet, because the things will start to shift and settle, I think, over the next 12 months. But what we do need to think about coming up is the next autumn and winter that we've got ahead of us, and how we get through that, how we accept and there are sort of like different things going on in terms of how you cope with this mentally. There's a difference between being resigned, so this is how it is, and accepting this is how it is. So when you resign to something, then it feels as if you've got no control over it, and your locus of control has shifted, and you're just being put through an experience that is really traumatic. But when you accept that, okay, this is going to be tough for a while longer, and in order for me to be able to keep going through this really tough time, I have to do something about my own well-being, because the workplace, unfortunately, isn't able to provide the level of resource that everybody needs. It isn't. And I do hear some very sad stories of the resources not just not being provided, but actually being pulled, so that they, money and energy and everything can be redirected just to cope with the physicality of input of patients coming through. So I really, really do appreciate where you're at. And this isn't something you've ever experienced before. No. This is all new, and it's hard. It's hard, and I think in order to respect ourselves, and in order to cope with this, we have to name it. We have to say, this is really hard. This is really, really hard. And there are times when I'm struggling. And when I struggle, then I need to find a way I can find those GRRs, those generalized resistance resources, that will keep me going. Keep me going. So we're going to think about what those goals might actually be. But before we do, is there anything anybody else would like to say about what is draining them right now?
I think I will go ahead.
How do we say your name?
Swizzle.
Swizzle. I was hoping that was the case.
Swizzle.
What a wonderful name.
Swizzle. So I was just going to say, just like Shiba has just mentioned, because of one thing, I think the first peak of the pandemic, I think me and my team. So I am a practice development nurse. I cover a few clinical areas with training and development. I think the first peak we had, we were redeployed, but also we had to do lots of training support. So I think there was a lot of adrenaline rush, and everyone was working extremely hard. But for me, the most challenging part was end of the first peak. There were so many new trainings, so many new upskillings of ward that we never stopped. And it's because in my role, it's a lot of supportive role as well. So going to different areas, talking to different people. So you feel the pain, but at the same time, you're showing a brave face because they're all looking up to you. So I think that was quite challenging for me, particularly. So, and now the cases are beginning to rise. So it's having that energy to keep going still. Just like Shiva said, can't see the end. But I think we all are here to support each other. So trying our best.
So during that time, I'm sort of reminded. I've been working with a few colleagues in Sweden, and we were looking at the impact of pandemic in terms of these the euphoria that was experienced at the beginning of, and for me, I personally, I would have loved to have been able to return to practice and join the front line and been there and do all of that. I felt the call in my heart. I really, really did. But I'm in a situation where I'm a carer and my husband, it was shielding, so it was impossible for me to do it. I know that a lot of people, like your good selves here today, became energized. And we're talking about well-being and energy, became energized by that initial. We're all working together. We're all trying to sort this out. We're all fighting on the front line as one, and being incredibly proud of being a nurse. I know that. And that is incredibly energizing, and will sustain you. Will sustain you through some really, really challenging and difficult times, including having to learn new things, having to work in different environments, having to continually be the person that your colleagues come to say, oh, this is awful, I can't cope. And as you say, Swizzle, having that smile for them, that will have sustained you. And one thing that we became aware of the back end of last year was there's going to be this big dip. There's going to be a huge dip, because after that euphoria has ended, it's not as if you can all go, oh, job's done. We can all take our holidays and we can all do various things, because the demand for service will not let up. And you will have a workforce that has been put in a position where they have risen to the challenge, only to then be in a situation where they cannot take time out and cannot have time to recalibrate and make sense of what on earth has just been happening to us. And we're going to reach a point where a lot of staff are going to experience burnout and compassion fatigue. And it's going to happen. And when I was talking about this last year, I have to say, not a lot of people wanted to hear that. But unfortunately, it is true. It is what's happened. Where we're at now, facing the next winter and feeling tired and lacking in energy is a difficult space. But what you have that you didn't have last time is your experience. You know now so much more than you did before. And I don't just mean in terms of, you've got different clinical skills or management skills or behavioral skills. You have got experience of remaining well and coping with a lot of demand on you physically and mentally. And that is loaded within you now. It's part of your biological makeup. It's part of who you are. When we talk about the self and that interaction between you as a human being and your experience with the outside world and how that shapes you and how then in turn you shape it. This last 12 months of experiencing COVID will have changed you. You are not the same people now than you were beforehand. And while you are tired, and I know you're tired, you have got coping mechanisms that you wouldn't have thought that you had before this happened. In order to not tip into those peripheral spaces, you have to be aware when you're starting to slide. And you have to be aware when your team is starting to slide, because there's a greater propensity now for that to happen. As we go into the autumn and winter, there's more likelihood for people to slide. So you've really, really got to be like an absolute eagle-eyed hawk on this and look into yourself and ask yourself, what number am I? What number am I today? Oh, I'm heading into a 5. What can I do? What can I tweak? Is there anything in this day for me that I can make my number return back to a 4? What can I do? And it's about doing that for yourself first, absolutely first, and then trying to find some gurus, some generalized assistance resources that will help your team. But the biggest guru is knowing when these things are happening and allowing people to say, this is happening to me. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, help me. So that's the biggest thing that we need to have right now in terms of the learning culture around this, is being able to do this, being able to talk. Can we have the next bit, please, Adam? Oh, we flew across. Okay, so I think we've covered this actually. So the thing we have to do is to check in. And were you able to figure out what number you are today? You don't have to share what it is, but just a nod if you were able to figure out between 1 and 7 what your number might be today. Brilliant. It's easy, isn't it? This is quite easy. Okay, so can we have the next bit, please, Anne? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so in terms of the endurance then going forward, being kind to yourself, you've got to make this your priority. And this really does return back to the notion of self-acceptance. And that means accepting when you are small and you're not coping, and accepting when you are great, because there are more times when you are great and you are coping and you are doing wonderful things than when you are small and things get just too much. And you need to remind yourself, most of the time, I am great. Most of the time, I got this. Most of the time, I got this. The next thing is to practice self-compassion. Do not push through when you're tired. Respect yourself. And when you're tired, when you're at home, and there's Lord knows how much washing to do or meals to prepare, if you can, and I know sometimes you can't, leave it. Leave it. Leave it either, if you can, to somebody else, or leave it till later. There used to be a saying when I was young, which was sort of went along the lines of, don't put off doing today what you can't do tomorrow. And I turn that around and I say to people, don't do today what you can do tomorrow, because today's got enough in it. So if you can get rid of stuff off your list, get rid of it. Be really self-aware. check in and ask yourself your number every day. Get into the habit of doing it. Don't slide into just accepting that your body is aching, that your shoulders are up by your ears, that it's normal to have headaches all the time. It's okay not to sleep. It's never okay. And remember, you can't do this on your own. If you're going to start to create a well-being culture around you, then you've got to take time out. And these little 2-circle things that we've quickly learned this afternoon, you can do this at home. You can get your kids to do this. Your kids have probably been through hell and high water this last year in terms of what's happening with school, about them missing their friends. You can get them to do this. You can get them to figure out, well, what's my number today? And talk to you in those terms. And you can go around your whole family and say, okay, what are our numbers today? Okay, well, we're all sliding. So what can we do? What can we do to change this? Can we have the next slide, please? Right. Oh, we're on to my favorite bit, where I get to shut up and you get to ask me any questions. And I really do mean it. You can ask me anything. So do switch on your mics and feel free to ask me anything. And if you don't get around to thinking of something today, you can put it in the chat box and I'll pick it up later, or my contact details are at the end of the slides, and you're very, very welcome to stay in touch with me. So ask me anything. What would you like to know?
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, and lots of tips for, certainly for me, as well as I'm sure the others on the call as well. Has anyone got any questions? Because I'm happy to. Sheba, is that a question you have for Dee? You're moving your camera. No, I might start actually, if that's okay. So a lot of what you've said has really resonated with me and made me think, I do need to think about myself and make sure that I'm focused on asking for help and making sure I seek support. What I found really interesting is, I think what I've been saying is I felt so through the pandemic, I changed roles. And I felt compelled, like you said, I felt a calling in my heart that I should go back to the front line. I should go and help. I didn't like the idea of newly qualified nurses, students kind of being put in situations they weren't experienced in or used to. So because I'm an intensive care nurse by background, I did some bank shifts, but then more than that, I went and took a role on the front line as a director of nursing, so running a hospital that focused on a surgical hospital. So we did a lot of work in the green sites for the urgent cancer care, working in partnership with the NHS. And it was amazing. Initially, it was that, that euphoria, that camaraderie, all working together for the greater good. But then the fatigue kind of set in, like you described. And the way I could only describe it was feeling emotionally full. So being the director of nursing, I felt like the buck stopped with me, that everything came to me and I had to take on all that emotion from my team because I felt that was my responsibility. And it almost felt I had no outlet for myself. Whereas seeing today and feeling and listening to the stories from the others on there has really made me realise that I did find a way. So I have found an outlet that I need to look after myself. But it just resonated greatly. And I guess what I want to say is thank you, because it's made me realise how far I've come in the last, 2 months, really, 3 months, is actually I do ask for help. I make sure I make time for myself to do exercise. Whereas when we were talking earlier about how do you feel today, I realised comparatively I'm in a much better place. I guess for me, Dee, thank you. It's really what I'm trying to say. Because it's been tough. It's been really, really tough. And there's a sense within the nursing community, you have to be strong, isn't it? You have to be strong for others. But actually saying I'm not okay is actually a really brave and courageous leadership. And showing your vulnerabilities is a sign of a really strong leader. I think that's what I'm going to take away from today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee.
Welcome.
And especially, the new concept of this boundaries, the 2 circles, it really resonates, and how quickly you could move towards the periphery. I've never thought of it that way at all. And it's such a nice and easy way to monitor yourself, as well as, in personal life, as well as in work life with your teams. You can very easily use this model to establish where your well-being is. So thank you so much for explaining that in a very simple way.
You're very welcome. And the thing is, if you find that your number slides down to the 5 or the 6 or the 7, then the thing to remember is when you're in those spaces, there's always a little glimmer of your best self. Even in the darkest time when you're in a 7, there is always that little chink of light. And the reason why I asked you to think about your best self first and remember who that person is that when you cognitively lock on to who you are in that space, it is incredibly powerful. It's almost like an energy magnet. And when you're in a 6 and you're low, you're depressed, you've got physical symptoms of disease, if you spend a moment remembering who you are at your best self, it can start to shift who you are and where you are and start to move you back up into a 5. And when you're in a 5, then you repeat the process. But instead of thinking, right, I'm in a 6, I'm going to head straight to 1, I'm going to be my best self later this afternoon, you have to be much kinder to yourself than that. And it's about, okay, so I remember what I'm like at 1, but I'm going to head for a 5. So what was I doing at a 5 that I can remember? What were my behaviors at a 5? What were my behaviors at a 4? I'm going to practice some of them. I'm just going to do some of them. And they can be really simple things like, well, when I'm a 4, I'm actually sort of like quite calm. And I'm able to say to people, yeah, it's okay, I got that. I can do that for you. I've got that slack, you know, and I'm different. My emotions are different. From all the research we've done over the years, the biggest indicator of the slide in the periphery are our emotions. And our emotions change drastically when we start to slide. And there is a gender split. So for a lot of women, most women, when you start to slide into the peripheral spaces, your emotions become heightened and most women cry. Most women express themselves, express stress, because it's just the way we're made. Most men, and these are generalizations, most men become angry and they start to shout and they become angry. So you can see, when you see those behaviors playing out in the workplace, it's helpful for you then to be able to step back from them and not be your energy to be taken by them, by appreciating, and they're really stressed. And it's not so personal. And then your number doesn't slide. You don't start to slide either then. So, top tip.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva. Thank you
very valuable. Yeah.
Thank you, Shiva. Oh, Swizzle, great. Swizzle's got a question for us. Great.
Not really a question, but just wanted to say thank you. I found this a very useful session, protective. You know, I'm still at work, but it was, I mean, it's quite protected. And I found it really helpful that although it is a small group, I think we could hear and listen to each other and resonate with each other. So I almost feel like I'm not alone.
No.
And yeah, so thank you for others as well for your contributions.
Well, Swizzle, you're definitely not on your own. That's
Thank you.
for sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say one thing to Swizzle. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when I was young, we used to have, I'm just going to show my age now, we used to have penny sweets at the local sweet shop, and one of my favorites were called Swizzles. So when I saw your name, I thought, oh, Swizzle. So I was really hoping that's how you pronounce your name, because one of my favorites, because I love sherbet. And Swizzle, isn't that wonderful?
Brilliant.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, an enormous thank you, Dee. It's been a wonderful webinar, and I've learned so much. It has been recorded, so if you want to come back, Swizzle, and Shiva, and watch it again or share with your colleagues, please do. It should be online over the next week or so, and we'll send a link out so you've got a link to that. So a huge thank you from us at the Academy for coming to join us, Dee. Then our next webinar will actually be on Tuesday, the 10th of August at 11 o'clock, and that'll be run by Professor Gemma Stacey, our Director of the Academy, and she'll be talking about managing your energy. So if you have got the time, please do join us. But again, it will be recorded if if you wish to kind of catch up later on, we'll share the link out with you all as alumni and scholars. So that's great. Well, Dee, thank you so much. If no one's got any other further questions, we'll finish up for today. Take some time out, look after yourselves, and remember to try and restore those energy levels and think about your 2 circles. I think these given us some real things to look at. Yeah. Look after ourselves and take care of ourselves and put ourselves first, but definitely make sure we're our best selves for everybody. Great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.